The cost of control, inside Canada's most secure prisons, Millhaven Institution and the financial legacy of Kingston Penitentiary. For nearly 2 centuries, the city of Kingston, Ontario has been the epicenter of Canada's most secure incarceration facilities. From the historic Kingston Penitentiary, which operated from 1835 until its closure in 2013, to the modern high-security Millhaven Institution, Canada's prison system has invested billions of public dollars into facilities designed to contain the country's most dangerous offenders. According to financial reports from the Correctional Service of Canada, federal incarceration costs in Canada have steadily increased over the past 2 decades, with the average annual cost of housing a single federal inmate exceeding $120,000 per year, and significantly higher for maximum security facilities. Millhaven Institution represents one of the most expensive segments of that system. Built to replace aging facilities like Kingston Penitentiary, it operates with enhanced security infrastructure, specialized staff units, and intensive monitoring systems designed for inmates classified as high risk. But the real story is not just about security. It is about economics. Government budget documents, parliamentary committee hearings, and auditor reports reveal that maximum security prisons represent some of the most expensive operational programs in Canada's federal justice system. Billions in taxpayer funds flow into construction, staffing, surveillance technology, healthcare, and maintenance. Yet major financial questions remain. Why are maximum security prisons so expensive to operate? How did Canada transition from the historic Kingston Penitentiary to newer facilities like Millhaven? And who ultimately benefits from the enormous public spending required to maintain high-security incarceration? This documentary follows the money. Using publicly available records, government reports, and investigative journalism, we examine the financial architecture behind Canada's most secure prisons. How they are funded, how budgets are allocated, and how the economics of incarceration shape public policy. At the center of the story are 2 institutions separated by time but connected by purpose: Kingston Penitentiary, the historic fortress that defined Canadian imprisonment for generations, and Millhaven Institution, the modern successor designed to carry that system into the future. The question is no longer simply how prisons operate. The deeper question is why the system costs so much, and what those costs reveal about the business of incarceration. In the world of modern criminal justice, maximum security prisons represent the most expensive form of punishment a government can impose. According to financial reports from the Correctional Service of Canada, the agency responsible for federal prisons, the annual cost of incarcerating one person in a federal institution regularly exceeds $120,000 per year. In maximum security facilities, that cost can climb even higher due to specialized staffing, infrastructure, and monitoring requirements. To understand why these costs are so high, investigators often begin with a simple principle. Follow the money. Canada's federal prison system currently houses inmates serving sentences of 2 years or longer. The system includes dozens of facilities across the country, divided into minimum, medium, and maximum security. But the financial weight of the system is not evenly distributed. Maximum security institutions consume a disproportionate share of the budget. Among the most significant of these facilities is Millhaven Institution, located just west of Kingston, Ontario. Millhaven is designed to house some of Canada's highest-risk federal inmates. The facility operates under the authority of the Correctional Service of Canada, which falls under the federal department known as Public Safety Canada. But Millhaven did not emerge in isolation. Its existence is tied directly to the legacy of another prison, one that once defined Canadian incarceration. For nearly 2 centuries, that role belonged to Kingston Penitentiary. When Kingston Penitentiary opened in 1835, it became the first federal penitentiary in Canada. For generations, it housed some of the country's most serious offenders. But the prison was built in a different era. Stone walls, narrow corridors, and 19th-century design eventually collided with the realities of modern corrections management. By the early 2000s, government reviews began raising serious financial concerns. Operating historic prisons like Kingston Penitentiary had become extremely expensive. Maintenance costs were rising. Security upgrades required major investments. An aging infrastructure created operational challenges that newer facilities could avoid. Government documents later revealed that maintaining these older facilities required significant capital spending. At the same time, Canada's prison population and security classifications were evolving. The government faced a strategic choice. Continue investing in aging prisons, or consolidate operations into newer, more modern facilities. The decision would reshape Canada's prison economy. According to official statements released by the Correctional Service of Canada, the federal government ultimately decided to close Kingston Penitentiary as part of a broader plan to modernize prison infrastructure. The prison officially shut down in 2013. But closing a prison does not eliminate its costs. In fact, the closure raised new financial questions. Government budgets showed that inmates from Kingston Penitentiary were redistributed across other institutions, including Millhaven. At the same time, Canada continued funding the operation of high-security prisons capable of handling maximum-risk offenders. Millhaven became one of the central facilities in that system. Unlike Kingston Penitentiary's historic architecture, Millhaven was designed with modern correctional strategies in mind. Security infrastructure includes reinforced perimeters, electronic surveillance systems, and specialized containment units. Each of these elements carries financial implications. Maximum security prisons require far more staff than lower security institutions. Correctional officers must supervise inmates closely. Specialized emergency response teams must remain available. Medical staff must handle complex health needs associated with long-term incarceration. Psychological services are required for inmates experiencing severe mental health conditions. All of these services draw from the federal corrections budget. And those budgets have grown steadily. Public financial reports show that Canada spends billions annually on federal corrections operations. According to the departmental plans published by the Correctional Service of Canada, operating expenses include staff salaries, facility maintenance, security systems, inmate healthcare, food services, and rehabilitation programming. Staffing alone represents one of the largest costs. Correctional officers must maintain secure operations 24 hours a day. Shift rotations, overtime costs, and specialized training programs significantly increase operational spending. In maximum security facilities like Millhaven, staff-to-inmate ratios are often higher than in medium or minimum security institutions. This increases payroll expenses. Healthcare costs also contribute to the financial burden. Federal prisons are responsible for providing medical care to inmates. According to Canadian correctional policy, inmates must receive healthcare services comparable to those available in the community. Delivering that care within a secure facility requires specialized logistics. Doctors, nurses, and mental health professionals must work inside controlled environments. Medical transportation and security escorts may be required for outside treatment. These costs accumulate over time. Another significant expense comes from infrastructure. Modern maximum security prisons depend heavily on technology. Surveillance cameras monitor movement throughout the facility. Electronic locking systems control cell doors and security gates. Perimeter detection systems guard against escape attempts. All of these systems require installation, maintenance, and periodic upgrades. Procurement records and government spending reports show that corrections agencies regularly contract private companies to provide equipment and technical services. These procurement relationships represent another major component of prison spending. But spending alone does not explain the full picture. The economic structure of incarceration also reflects policy choices. Over the years, Canadian governments have debated how to balance security, rehabilitation, and cost management. Parliamentary committee hearings have examined the rising costs of federal corrections. Auditor reports have evaluated whether spending aligns with outcomes. Some critics argue that maximum security incarceration is one of the most expensive tools in the criminal justice system. Others argue that it is necessary to protect public safety. Both perspectives acknowledge one fundamental reality. Maximum security prisons operate at an enormous financial scale. Facilities like Millhaven represent not just institutions of confinement, but complex economic systems. Thousands of employees depend on prison operations for their livelihoods. Local economies may benefit from correctional employment. Construction and maintenance contracts generate revenue for private companies. And billions of taxpayer dollars flow through the system each year. The story of Canada's most secure prisons is therefore not just a story about crime or punishment. It is a story about public spending, government priorities, and institutional design. Kingston Penitentiary represented the beginning of Canada's federal incarceration system. Millhaven represents its modern evolution. But the deeper question remains unresolved. How much does maximum security really cost? And where exactly does that money go? Those answers begin to emerge when investigators look beyond prison walls and into the budgets, contracts, and financial structures that keep the system running. Because behind every locked gate and reinforced perimeter lies a network of funding decisions that shape the future of incarceration. And as the next chapter will reveal, the true scale of prison spending becomes visible only when government budgets are examined line by line. When most people imagine a maximum security prison, they picture towering walls, steel doors, and armed guards. But behind every wall and every locked gate lies something less visible and far more powerful. A budget. Every prison operates within a financial structure shaped by government appropriations, policy decisions, and administrative planning. These budgets determine staffing levels, infrastructure investments, security technologies, healthcare services, and rehabilitation programs. And when investigators examine the numbers, the financial scale of modern incarceration becomes clear. According to departmental spending reports published by the Correctional Service of Canada, the federal agency responsible for managing prisons and supervising offenders serving sentences of 2 years or longer, annual correctional spending regularly reaches into the billions of dollars. In recent years, the agency's total operating budget has exceeded 4 billion Canadian dollars annually, covering everything from prison operations to parole supervision, infrastructure upgrades, and inmate services. A large portion of that spending is concentrated inside secure institutions. Facilities such as Millhaven Institution represent some of the most resource-intensive components of the system. Maximum security prisons require higher staffing levels, advanced surveillance systems, reinforced infrastructure, and specialized operational procedures. Each of those requirements translates directly into financial commitments. To understand where the money goes, analysts often start with the largest category in any prison budget. Personnel. Staff salaries represent the single largest expense in Canada's federal correctional system. According to departmental plans released by the Correctional Service of Canada, correctional officers, healthcare professionals, administrative staff, and support personnel account for the majority of operational spending. Running a maximum security facility requires continuous supervision. Correctional officers must monitor inmate movement, enforce security procedures, respond to emergencies, and maintain order within highly controlled environments. Unlike many public sector workplaces, prisons operate 24 hours a day. That means multiple staffing shifts, overtime coverage, and specialized response units. In maximum security institutions, staff-to-inmate ratios are generally higher than in lower security facilities. That difference exists for a reason. Many inmates housed in maximum security prisons have histories of violence, escape attempts, or serious institutional misconduct. Managing those risks requires closer supervision. More officers on duty means greater payroll obligations. Over time, these personnel costs accumulate into hundreds of millions of dollars annually across the federal prison system. But salaries represent only one piece of the financial structure. Another major cost comes from inmate healthcare. Canadian correctional policy requires that incarcerated individuals receive healthcare services comparable to those available to the general public. Delivering those services inside secure environments presents logistical challenges that increase costs. Medical staff must work within controlled prison settings. Certain treatments require security escorts. Hospital visits may involve transportation arrangements and additional personnel. Mental health care has also become a significant area of correctional spending. Government reports and parliamentary discussions have acknowledged that federal prisons house a disproportionate number of inmates with mental health conditions. Providing psychiatric services, therapy programs, and crisis interventions requires trained professionals and specialized facilities. These services are not optional. They are mandated by policy and oversight frameworks designed to ensure humane treatment. Food services represent another substantial expense. Every federal inmate must receive daily meals that meet national nutritional standards. Large prison kitchens operate similarly to industrial food service systems. They require supplies, staff, equipment maintenance, and compliance with health regulations. Although food costs per inmate may appear modest individually, the total spending across the entire correctional population becomes significant. Utilities also play a role. Large institutions like Millhaven Institution consume vast amounts of electricity, heating, and water. Security lighting must remain active throughout the night. Electronic monitoring systems operate continuously. Climate control systems maintain stable conditions within housing units. Over time, utility costs form another layer of operational spending. Infrastructure maintenance represents yet another financial obligation. Unlike office buildings or schools, maximum security prisons endure constant physical stress. Doors, locks, fences, and surveillance systems are used repeatedly under strict security conditions. Maintenance crews must repair damage, replace worn components, and ensure systems remain operational. Even small repairs can become complex when security protocols are involved. Every contractor entering a prison environment must undergo security clearance and follow controlled procedures. These factors increase the cost of routine maintenance. But some of the most expensive expenditures come from technology. Modern correctional facilities rely heavily on surveillance infrastructure. Camera systems monitor corridors, yards, and housing units. Motion sensors protect restricted areas. Electronic locking systems control cell doors and internal barriers. Perimeter detection technology alerts staff to potential escape attempts. These systems require installation, upgrades, software management, and long-term maintenance contracts. Government procurement records show that correctional agencies regularly purchase security equipment from specialized technology providers. These purchases often involve multi-year service agreements. In some cases, entire security networks must be replaced as technology evolves. Capital projects introduce another layer of spending. Large correctional institutions require periodic infrastructure upgrades. Housing units may need renovation. Security perimeters may require reinforcement. New units may be constructed to address overcrowding or operational needs. Funding for these projects typically appears in federal budget allocations or departmental capital plans. When analysts examine these financial documents, they begin to see a pattern. Maximum security prisons function not only as correctional institutions but as complex economic ecosystems. Thousands of employees receive salaries funded through public budgets. Private contractors provide technology, maintenance, and construction services. Local communities sometimes depend on prison employment as a stable economic base. Kingston, Ontario provides a clear example. For generations, the city served as a hub for federal corrections. The presence of facilities such as Kingston Penitentiary and nearby institutions created a local workforce deeply connected to prison operations. When Kingston Penitentiary closed in 2013, discussions about the economic impact quickly followed. Local businesses, municipal officials, and community members raised concerns about employment and economic activity tied to the prison system. Although other correctional facilities remained active in the region, the closure highlighted an often overlooked aspect of incarceration economics. Prisons are not only sites of confinement. They are also major employers. Correctional officers, healthcare workers, food service staff, maintenance technicians, administrative personnel, and security specialists all depend on correctional budgets for their livelihoods. According to labor statistics and government workforce data, thousands of Canadians work within federal corrections. Their salaries are funded directly by taxpayer dollars. These economic relationships create powerful institutional structures. Once a prison becomes embedded in a regional economy, its closure or restructuring can have far-reaching consequences. Local governments may advocate for continued operations. Labor unions representing correctional employees may lobby for job protection. Federal policymakers must balance fiscal efficiency with employment considerations. This dynamic creates a complex feedback loop. Correctional spending sustains jobs. Those jobs become part of regional economies. And those economies influence political discussions about prison policy. The financial architecture of incarceration therefore extends far beyond prison walls. It touches government budgets, labor markets, and regional development strategies. Yet financial oversight mechanisms also play a critical role. Canada's correctional system operates under multiple layers of review and accountability. Parliamentary committees examine departmental spending. Auditor reports evaluate financial management practices. Independent oversight bodies investigate complaints and institutional performance. One of the most significant oversight roles is held by the Office of the Correctional Investigator, an independent body responsible for reviewing issues related to federal corrections. Reports from this office often highlight systemic challenges within the prison system, including resource allocation, inmate conditions, and operational policies. Financial transparency remains a key component of these reviews. Budget documents, departmental plans, and public accounts provide detailed information about how correctional funds are spent. These documents allow journalists, researchers, and policymakers to analyze spending patterns. They also reveal how correctional priorities shift over time. In some years, spending increases due to infrastructure upgrades or staffing expansions. In other years, budget constraints may lead to operational adjustments. But one trend has remained consistent. Maximum security incarceration remains one of the most expensive elements of Canada's criminal justice system. Facilities like Millhaven represent the highest tier of that spending. Every camera, every reinforced gate, every trained officer contributes to the financial architecture of security. Yet the numbers alone do not tell the entire story. Behind the budgets lie contracts. Procurement deals. Technology providers. Construction companies. Service agreements. These relationships form another layer of the prison economy, one that operates largely outside public view. And as investigators continue to follow the money, a new set of questions begins to emerge. Who supplies the infrastructure that keeps maximum security prisons running? How are these contracts awarded? And what role do private companies play in the economics of incarceration? Those answers begin to surface when the financial trail leads beyond government budgets and into the world of correctional procurement. That is where the next chapter takes us. When people think about prisons, they often imagine a system run entirely by the government. Public buildings. Public employees. Public budgets. But modern incarceration systems rely on a much broader network of organizations. Behind the physical walls of maximum security institutions lies a web of procurement agreements, service contracts, technology suppliers, and construction partnerships. These relationships shape how prisons operate. They also shape how public money flows. In Canada, federal prisons are operated by the Correctional Service of Canada, a government agency under Public Safety Canada. Unlike some countries that have experimented with fully privatized prisons, Canada's federal correctional institutions remain publicly operated. But public operation does not mean the system functions without private sector involvement. In reality, prisons depend heavily on procurement networks. Everything from surveillance systems to food supplies, maintenance services, and construction projects requires external vendors. For facilities such as Millhaven Institution, these procurement relationships form a critical part of daily operations. The process begins with federal procurement rules. Government agencies in Canada must follow strict contracting guidelines designed to ensure transparency and competition. Major purchases typically pass through Public Services and Procurement Canada, the federal department responsible for managing government contracting and purchasing. According to federal procurement policies, contracts must be publicly tendered unless specific exemptions apply. Companies submit bids, proposals are evaluated, and contracts are awarded based on price, technical capability, and compliance with government standards. In theory, this system ensures fairness and accountability. In practice, it also creates a complex marketplace surrounding the correctional system. Security technology represents one of the most specialized segments of that marketplace. Maximum security prisons rely heavily on electronic monitoring systems. Surveillance cameras, perimeter detection sensors, electronic door controls, and communication networks all require specialized equipment. Installing these systems involves large procurement contracts. Maintenance agreements often extend for years. Government procurement databases reveal that federal correctional facilities regularly purchase equipment and services from technology companies specializing in security infrastructure. These systems must meet extremely high reliability standards. A failure in surveillance equipment inside a maximum security facility is not merely inconvenient. It is a security risk. For that reason, correctional agencies invest heavily in monitoring technology. Electronic security systems operate continuously inside institutions like Millhaven. Camera networks track movement through corridors and housing units. Control rooms monitor dozens, sometimes hundreds, of camera feeds. Electronic locks control internal access points, allowing officers to restrict movement throughout the facility. These systems are designed to reduce human error and improve response times during emergencies. But they also require constant upgrades. Technology evolves rapidly. Security vulnerabilities must be addressed. Software systems require updates. Hardware eventually reaches the end of its operational life. Each of these developments generates additional procurement activity. Another major category of prison contracting involves construction and infrastructure. Correctional institutions are among the most complex government facilities to build. Unlike office buildings or residential developments, prisons must meet strict security engineering standards. Perimeter fences must resist climbing or cutting. Observation towers must provide unobstructed views. Housing units must balance surveillance visibility with controlled movement. Doors and barriers must withstand repeated use while maintaining high security. These requirements make prison construction projects technically demanding. When new units are built or existing facilities renovated, construction contracts can reach millions of dollars. For example, infrastructure upgrades at federal correctional facilities often appear in capital spending plans published by the Correctional Service of Canada. These upgrades may involve expanding housing units, reinforcing security perimeters, replacing aging electrical systems, or modernizing surveillance infrastructure. Each project is funded through federal budgets and implemented through procurement agreements with engineering firms and construction contractors. The economic impact of these projects extends beyond prison operations. Large infrastructure contracts generate employment for construction workers, engineers, project managers, and suppliers. Local economies can benefit from these projects, especially in regions where correctional institutions serve as major employers. Kingston, Ontario illustrates this dynamic clearly. For generations, the city's identity was closely linked to federal corrections. The presence of facilities such as Kingston Penitentiary created a regional network of correctional employment and supporting industries. When the historic prison closed in 2013, government officials and community leaders debated how to manage the economic transition. Some contracts ended. Others shifted toward remaining institutions in the region, including Millhaven. But construction and technology are not the only areas where procurement plays a role. Prisons also rely on extensive service contracts. Food supply agreements ensure that institutions receive consistent deliveries of ingredients for inmate meals. Laundry services may involve industrial-scale equipment and maintenance contracts. Waste management companies handle disposal and sanitation services. Maintenance contractors repair plumbing, electrical systems, and building infrastructure. Each service requires coordination between prison administrators and external providers. Even basic operational needs can involve complex procurement arrangements. Consider something as simple as prison uniforms. Correctional officers require standardized uniforms designed for durability and identification. Inmates may receive institutional clothing manufactured under government contracts. These supply chains operate quietly behind the scenes but represent another layer of correctional spending. Healthcare procurement represents another significant category. Medical equipment must meet regulatory standards. Pharmaceutical supplies must be delivered under secure conditions. Specialized treatment services may involve agreements with external healthcare providers. In some cases, inmates requiring advanced medical care must be transported to hospitals outside the prison system. These arrangements involve coordination between correctional authorities and public healthcare institutions. All of these relationships form part of what analysts sometimes describe as the correctional procurement ecosystem. While the prison itself remains a public institution, a large network of private companies supports its operation. Technology firms provide surveillance systems. Engineering companies design infrastructure upgrades. Food distributors supply prison kitchens. Maintenance contractors repair facilities. Medical suppliers deliver healthcare equipment and pharmaceuticals. This structure raises important questions about accountability and oversight. Government procurement rules exist to prevent misuse of public funds. Contracts must follow competitive bidding processes. Audits may review spending patterns. But large procurement systems can also become complicated. Multiple contracts, vendors, and service agreements create layers of administrative complexity. Oversight institutions attempt to monitor these processes. Financial audits conducted by government agencies evaluate whether funds are used efficiently. Parliamentary committees may review procurement decisions. Journalists and researchers sometimes examine government contracting databases to identify spending patterns. These transparency mechanisms play a critical role in maintaining public trust. However, they also reveal the sheer scale of the prison economy. Correctional budgets do not stop at prison walls. They extend into industries that supply goods, services, and infrastructure. For companies involved in these contracts, correctional institutions represent stable long-term clients. Unlike many commercial markets, prison demand remains relatively predictable. Facilities operate continuously. Security systems require ongoing maintenance. Food services operate every day. Infrastructure upgrades occur periodically. These factors make correctional procurement a steady source of government spending. Yet the financial structure also reflects broader policy choices. Government decisions about incarceration levels directly affect correctional spending. When prison populations increase, operational costs rise. More inmates require more food, healthcare, supervision, and infrastructure. When facilities expand or new units are constructed, capital spending increases. When policies emphasize rehabilitation or community supervision, spending may shift toward alternative programs. These policy debates shape the financial architecture of incarceration. Maximum security prisons sit at the center of that architecture. Facilities such as Millhaven represent the most intensive level of correctional spending. Every security layer adds financial weight. Every new technology requires procurement. Every infrastructure upgrade introduces new contracts. But beyond the financial systems lies a deeper question. What outcomes does this spending produce? Do the enormous costs of maximum security incarceration achieve their intended goals? Do investments in security infrastructure improve safety? Do correctional programs reduce recidivism? Do public funds generate measurable societal benefits? These questions appear regularly in legislative hearings, academic studies, and policy debates. They also reveal the broader tension at the heart of modern corrections. Security is expensive. Rehabilitation requires resources. Public safety demands accountability. Balancing these priorities requires careful financial management. And as the final chapter will reveal, the economic impact of Canada's prison system extends beyond institutions, contracts, and budgets. It ultimately shapes how societies define punishment, justice, and responsibility. Because when billions of public dollars flow into incarceration systems, the question is no longer simply how prisons operate. The real question becomes why societies choose to spend so much on confinement, and what alternatives might exist beyond the walls. The true cost of a prison is rarely measured only in concrete, steel, or razor wire. It is measured in budgets. It is measured in policy decisions. And it is measured in the long financial shadow incarceration casts over public institutions. Facilities like Millhaven Institution exist because governments have decided that certain individuals must be separated from society for extended periods of time. That decision carries moral, legal, and social implications. But it also carries a price. In Canada's federal correctional system, incarceration is one of the most expensive tools of criminal justice. Annual departmental spending from the Correctional Service of Canada regularly exceeds several $billions, according to federal budget documents and departmental plans tabled before Parliament. Those funds sustain an entire national infrastructure of prisons, staff, oversight systems, rehabilitation programs, healthcare services, and supervision networks. And maximum security institutions sit at the most expensive end of that system. Housing inmates in facilities designed for the highest security classification requires extensive resources. Staffing levels increase. Security technologies expand. Medical and psychological services become more complex. All of these factors translate into financial obligations that continue year after year. Yet the economics of incarceration extend far beyond annual operating budgets. Prisons also represent long-term capital investments. Building a modern correctional facility requires enormous upfront spending. Land acquisition, architectural design, engineering systems, reinforced construction materials, and security infrastructure must all be funded before the first inmate ever enters the facility. These projects often cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Once constructed, those facilities must be maintained, upgraded, and eventually renovated or replaced. Infrastructure ages. Security systems become outdated. Housing units require refurbishment. In many cases, these upgrades appear in government capital expenditure plans published by the Correctional Service of Canada. Over decades, the cumulative financial impact becomes substantial. The story of Kingston Penitentiary illustrates this long arc of correctional spending. When the historic prison opened in 1835, it represented a major public works project for a young nation. Built with limestone walls and fortress-like architecture, the penitentiary was designed to symbolize state authority and social order. But by the early 21st century, maintaining that historic facility had become increasingly expensive. Government reviews noted that aging infrastructure required significant maintenance. Security upgrades were difficult to integrate into 19th-century construction. Operational costs rose as the building aged. In 2013, the federal government ultimately decided to close Kingston Penitentiary. Officials from the Correctional Service of Canada stated that closing older institutions and consolidating operations into modern facilities would improve efficiency and reduce long-term costs. In theory, newer facilities like Millhaven Institution could operate more efficiently. Modern prison design allows for improved surveillance visibility, centralized control rooms, and more efficient housing units. Electronic monitoring systems reduce the need for certain manual processes. Infrastructure built for modern correctional practices can be easier to maintain than historic structures. But modernization does not eliminate costs. It simply redistributes them. Newer facilities still require extensive staffing, maintenance, and technology upgrades. And as correctional budgets demonstrate, the total cost of incarceration remains high. Yet financial analysis reveals another dimension of the prison economy. Employment. Correctional institutions are major employers. According to workforce data and government employment statistics, thousands of Canadians work within the federal correctional system. Correctional officers, healthcare professionals, educators, administrative staff, maintenance workers, and program specialists all depend on correctional budgets for their salaries. These jobs are funded through taxpayer spending. In many communities, correctional employment represents a stable source of income. Kingston, Ontario again provides a clear example. For decades, the city became known informally as Canada's prison capital. Multiple federal institutions operated in the region, creating a significant local workforce tied directly to corrections. When Kingston Penitentiary closed, concerns emerged about the economic impact. Local officials and community leaders discussed how the closure might affect employment and regional economic activity. Although other facilities in the area continued operating, the event highlighted an important economic reality. Prisons influence local economies. Correctional employees purchase homes, pay taxes, and support local businesses. Construction contracts and infrastructure projects generate economic activity. Supply chains extend into food services, equipment manufacturing, and maintenance industries. For some communities, prisons become embedded in the regional economy. This dynamic creates complex policy incentives. Governments must balance fiscal responsibility with employment considerations. Closing a prison may reduce operational costs, but it can also disrupt local economies. Expanding facilities may create jobs but increase public spending. These trade-offs often appear in political discussions surrounding correctional policy. At the national level, incarceration also intersects with broader debates about criminal justice reform. Researchers, policymakers, and advocacy organizations regularly analyze the financial impact of incarceration systems. Some studies examine whether high correctional spending produces measurable improvements in public safety. Others analyze recidivism rates and rehabilitation outcomes. The results of these discussions often appear in parliamentary committee hearings and policy reports. Canada's correctional system operates under several layers of oversight designed to evaluate these issues. Independent bodies review prison conditions, resource allocation, and operational practices. One of the most prominent oversight institutions is the Office of the Correctional Investigator. Reports from this office frequently examine systemic challenges within federal prisons. These reports may address issues such as inmate health care, mental health services, institutional safety, and resource distribution. Financial transparency is an essential part of these oversight processes. Budget documents published by the Correctional Service of Canada allow policymakers and researchers to examine how correctional funds are allocated. Parliamentary committees review departmental plans and spending proposals. Auditors may investigate whether resources are being used effectively. Together, these mechanisms aim to ensure accountability for billions of dollars in public spending. But oversight alone cannot answer the deeper philosophical question at the center of the prison economy. What is incarceration supposed to achieve? Historically, prisons have served multiple purposes. Punishment. Deterrence. Public protection. Rehabilitation. Each objective carries different financial implications. Punishment requires secure confinement. Deterrence requires visible enforcement. Public protection requires long-term incapacitation of dangerous offenders. Rehabilitation requires education, treatment programs, and reintegration planning. Balancing these goals requires complex policy decisions. Maximum security prisons exist primarily to protect public safety by containing individuals considered too dangerous for lower security environments. Facilities like Millhaven Institution perform that function within Canada's correctional system. They house inmates classified at the highest security levels. These individuals often require intensive supervision and specialized management. Maintaining that level of control is expensive. But policymakers argue that the cost reflects the responsibility of protecting society. Yet some analysts argue that long-term incarceration can create financial pressures that ripple throughout government budgets. Correctional spending competes with other public priorities. Healthcare systems require funding. Education programs demand investment. Infrastructure projects require capital. In democratic societies, these priorities must coexist within limited public budgets. Every dollar spent on incarceration is a dollar that cannot be spent elsewhere. This reality does not automatically invalidate correctional spending. But it highlights the importance of evaluating how resources are used. Are prisons operating efficiently? Are rehabilitation programs reducing reoffending? Are security investments producing measurable safety outcomes? These questions continue to shape criminal justice policy across Western democracies. Canada is no exception. Over time, correctional strategies evolve. New research influences rehabilitation programs. Technological innovations reshape security practices. Budgetary pressures encourage efficiency reforms. Facilities close, expand, or modernize in response to these changes. The closure of Kingston Penitentiary and the continued operation of Millhaven Institution illustrate this evolution. One institution represented the legacy of 19th-century incarceration. The other represents the modern infrastructure of federal corrections. But both institutions reveal the same underlying truth. Prisons are not only instruments of justice. They are also financial systems. Every cell block, surveillance camera, and correctional officer exists within a network of budgets, contracts, and public spending decisions. Those decisions determine how incarceration functions. They determine how resources are distributed. And ultimately, they determine how societies choose to administer punishment. When investigators follow the money through prison systems, they discover that the economics of incarceration shape far more than prison operations. They shape public policy. They shape local economies. And they shape the ongoing debate about how justice should be delivered in modern society. Because behind every prison wall lies a financial architecture that most citizens never see. And understanding that architecture is the first step toward understanding the true cost of punishment. The future cost of confinement ****. Across Canada, prison walls stand as symbols of authority, control, and public safety. But behind those walls lies a financial question that governments across the Western world continue to confront. How much should a society spend on incarceration? Facilities such as Millhaven Institution represent the modern face of Canada's maximum security correctional system. Built with reinforced infrastructure, electronic surveillance networks, and controlled housing units, the institution reflects decades of evolution in correctional design. Yet even the most modern prison is only one part of a much larger financial structure. Every correctional institution exists inside a national budget. Every operational decision connects to public spending. And every policy shift in criminal justice carries long-term financial consequences. According to publicly available financial plans released by the Correctional Service of Canada, the federal correctional system manages thousands of inmates across dozens of facilities throughout the country. Operating those institutions requires a continuous flow of funding. Staff salaries, infrastructure maintenance, inmate healthcare, security technology, food services, rehabilitation programs, and administrative operations all draw from the federal treasury. These expenses repeat every year. Unlike temporary government programs, prisons do not shut down during economic downturns. They operate continuously. This stability makes correctional spending relatively predictable compared with other public expenditures. But it also means that costs accumulate steadily over time. Long-term incarceration amplifies this effect. Many federal inmates serve sentences measured not in months, but in years or decades. During that time, the government remains responsible for housing, supervising, and providing health care for each individual. The financial commitment therefore extends far beyond the moment of sentencing. Some policy analysts refer to this phenomenon as the lifetime cost of incarceration. Once a prison sentence begins, the government assumes an ongoing obligation that can span decades. In maximum security institutions, that obligation becomes even more expensive. Facilities designed to house high-risk offenders require enhanced security systems, specialized staff training, and additional operational controls. These elements are visible inside institutions like Millhaven Institution, where surveillance technology, controlled movement procedures, and reinforced infrastructure define the daily environment. Each layer of security represents both a safety measure and a financial commitment. Camera systems require maintenance. Electronic locks require upgrades. Perimeter detection systems must remain operational around the clock. Personnel must be trained to operate and monitor these systems. Over time, these operational costs accumulate into a significant portion of the federal corrections budget. Yet the economic impact of incarceration extends beyond prison operations themselves. Correctional spending also influences labor markets. Thousands of Canadians are employed within the federal correctional system. Correctional officers form the largest segment of that workforce, but they are far from the only employees. Healthcare professionals provide medical and psychological services. Educators and program facilitators manage rehabilitation programs. Maintenance staff ensure that infrastructure remains operational. Administrative personnel coordinate logistics, records management, and policy implementation. All of these positions are funded through public spending. In regions where correctional facilities are located, those jobs often become an important part of the local economy. This dynamic can be seen clearly in Kingston, Ontario, where the historic Kingston Penitentiary operated for nearly 180 years before closing in 2013. For generations, correctional employment played a major role in the city's economic identity. The closure of the penitentiary did not eliminate correctional employment in the region, as other federal institutions continue to operate nearby. But the event highlighted the economic influence that prisons can exert on local communities. When a correctional facility opens, expands, or closes, the effects extend beyond the prison gates. Housing markets, local businesses, municipal tax revenues, and employment patterns may all be affected. This reality introduces an additional layer of complexity to correctional policy decisions. Governments must consider not only the costs of prison operations but also the broader economic impact of maintaining or restructuring correctional infrastructure. Another major factor shaping the future cost of incarceration is demographics. Over time, the composition of prison populations changes. In many Western countries, researchers have observed rising numbers of inmates requiring specialized healthcare services, including mental health treatment and age-related medical care. As incarcerated populations age, correctional healthcare costs can increase. Providing medical treatment inside secure environments often requires specialized equipment and trained staff. Transporting inmates to outside hospitals may involve security escorts and additional logistical coordination. These factors add further financial pressures to correctional budgets. Government reports and parliamentary discussions have acknowledged these challenges. Policymakers must balance healthcare obligations with operational budgets while maintaining institutional safety. Mental health services represent another growing area of correctional spending. According to reports from oversight bodies including the Office of the Correctional Investigator, a significant proportion of federal inmates experience mental health issues that require treatment and monitoring. Providing those services inside secure facilities requires trained clinicians, specialized units, and ongoing program funding. These needs place additional demands on correctional budgets. Technology will also shape the future economics of prisons. Security systems continue to evolve. Modern facilities increasingly rely on digital surveillance networks, biometric identification systems, and advanced monitoring technologies. These tools may improve operational efficiency and security oversight. But they also require investment. Technology cycles move quickly. Equipment becomes outdated. Software systems require updates and cybersecurity protections. Each new generation of security technology introduces both opportunities and costs. Some analysts argue that technological innovation may eventually reduce certain operational expenses by automating routine monitoring tasks. Others caution that new technology often adds complexity rather than replacing existing systems. In many cases, older infrastructure must remain operational alongside newer technologies. This layered approach can increase rather than decrease long-term spending. Another factor influencing future correctional spending involves criminal justice policy itself. Government decisions about sentencing laws, parole systems, and rehabilitation programs directly affect prison populations. When incarceration rates increase, correctional budgets must expand to accommodate additional inmates. When policies emphasize alternatives to incarceration, prison populations may stabilize or decline. These shifts can have major financial implications. Some Western countries have experimented with strategies designed to reduce reliance on long-term incarceration. Community supervision programs, restorative justice initiatives, and rehabilitation-focused sentencing policies have all been explored as alternatives in certain cases. The financial motivations behind these approaches are often part of the discussion. Maintaining large prison populations requires continuous public spending. If alternative programs can achieve similar public safety outcomes at lower cost, policymakers may consider those options. In Canada, such debates continue to appear in academic research, parliamentary hearings, and public policy discussions. The federal correctional system must adapt to changing legal frameworks, evolving research on rehabilitation, and shifting public expectations about justice. Facilities like Millhaven Institution remain essential components of that system. Certain offenders require high-security incarceration for public safety reasons. But even within maximum security institutions, correctional strategies continue to evolve. Programs focused on education, behavioral intervention, and reintegration aim to prepare inmates for eventual release whenever possible. These initiatives also require funding. Rehabilitation programs involve trained staff, educational materials, and dedicated facilities. But supporters argue that successful rehabilitation can reduce recidivism, potentially lowering long-term correctional costs. Evaluating these outcomes remains a major focus of correctional research. Governments rely on data analysis to determine whether programs are achieving their intended goals. Recidivism rates, institutional safety statistics, and post-release employment outcomes all contribute to policy evaluations. These analyses help determine how future correctional budgets will be allocated. Ultimately, the economics of incarceration reflects a broader societal choice. Every prison represents a commitment to maintain secure confinement for individuals who have been convicted of serious crimes. That commitment carries moral responsibilities, legal obligations, and financial costs. From the limestone walls of Kingston Penitentiary to the modern infrastructure of Millhaven Institution, Canada's correctional system has evolved alongside the country itself. But one constant remains. Prisons require resources. They require public investment. And they require ongoing oversight to ensure that those resources are used responsibly. For taxpayers, policymakers, and citizens, the question is not whether incarceration carries a cost. The cost is already documented in government budgets and financial reports. The deeper question is how societies choose to manage that cost. How much should be spent on security? How much should be invested in rehabilitation? How should correctional systems balance punishment with long-term public safety? These questions have no simple answers. But understanding the financial architecture behind prisons provides an essential starting point. Because when the money behind incarceration is examined closely, the conversation about justice becomes clearer. Behind every locked gate lies not only a legal decision, but a financial one. And the future of incarceration will be shaped as much by budgets and policy choices as by prison walls themselves. Disclaimer. This documentary is based on publicly available records, financial reports, and investigative journalism. Some details may be simplified for narrative clarity.